Welcome to the Live Like Jesus podcast, where we are striving to live like Jesus every day. We want to live like Jesus lived so that we can do what Jesus did. So with us today, myself, I'm Brian, lead pastor, First Moss Bluff. John,
hey.
Lead pastor. No, that's it. That's his dream.
I actually am.
That's his dream.
Way off. If we're being totally honest, I'm the global lead.
The global lead.
The global.
So connection pastor at
Yes.
first, and then for the first time ever, everybody if you're at your home, give a round of applause for Bo Guidry, small groups fella at first.
Attaboy. We're ready.
I hear.
So today's gonna be a good day. We're talking about fasting.
Yeah, and so I as I was preparing for this, I was kind of thinking about, out of the 9 habits that we've been sort of diving into, fasting, I have to admit personally is one of the ones that if I had to look at all of them, there was 3 that I kind of knew I needed to make some space in my life for. And fasting is one of those. And so Sabbath I've talked about, and silence and solitude wasn't real natural for me. Fasting kind of falls in that category for me. And I think it falls into that category for a lot of people. Like, all right, what do I actually do to make that part? So I'm really excited that we're going to get into this topic today. But before we kind of dive into what fasting is and kind of even, in another episode, how we do it, I think we should talk about, from a cultural standpoint, when we mention the word fasting, or when we hear the word fasting, what do you think our culture means when they say fasting? Is it spiritual? Is it
a health lose weight?
Is it a health trend, or maybe it's something they never even tried? What do y'all think, kind of comes to mind?
Yeah, so intermittent fasting that people do for health reasons or losing weight reasons or whatever else they might be. Yeah, intermittent fasting is probably what most people think of when they think, I'm going to fast.
Yeah.
So, biblical or, fasting, it's like, I'm going to fast from sundown to sunup. Well, we all kind of do that.
Yeah.
It's called sleep.
Yeah.
So, sound like going to get blood work done. Oh, I can't eat after midnight. I'm thinking, it's not a big deal. I don't think I ever eat after midnight because I'm at bed at 8 o'clock.
Sleeping for, yeah. Go ahead.
I think that is kind of one of probably the main things, especially, that's something that I'm currently doing. It works, so everybody's kind of trying it. I think it does.
So are you on that coffee diet?
I'm not on that one. There are a couple of guys that are doing it in our church that they seem miserable.
Unfortunately.
As they should be.
Today I'm on a coffee fast for a little while.
Wow.
We'll see what happens.
And did I hear you say when you go into the camp this weekend, you're not going to eat it all? I don't know how you're going to do that.
I was thinking about it. Amber's sending me with some bacon and eggs, and we'll see what happens. We'll see how long I can go. But that's the thing. I think most people kind of, when they talk about fasting, it's more culturally, it's just, all right, what can I do to get my health in check or kind of reset some things, that sort of thing. But what are some other things that you think people think about? I know culturally, Bo, you might have some experience with this from back when you were living in Acadiana. Like, there are some denominations that might choose to fast from like a certain thing on a certain day and that sort of thing.
Well, I think it was a calendared event that you were going to fast from different things leading up to Mardi Gras and the Roman Catholic tradition. That was just something that you were going to do, or actually coming out of Mardi Gras for Lent.
Right.
And so that's something here in South Louisiana that's kind of gone outside of that church or religion. And so it's pretty common. Like, I'm not going to do things for this next 6 weeks that I like to do a whole lot, but the day before it, I'm gonna have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So that's Mardi Gras, right?
Celebration time. Yeah, that's what we're doing. I'm from New Iberia, so I grew up in that part of the state, and I can remember I'm a plate lunch connoisseur. I don't know if y'all knew that about me.
I did not.
Yeah, I've tasted almost all of them.
Wow.
And so in New Iberia is known for their plate lunch places.
There's better food in the gas stations in New Iberia and Lafayette than most other places.
I'm glad you said it.
Yeah,
it's a true statement.
I broke the stock.
And so I can remember growing up, like, normal days they'd have like any kind of food you could think of. But on Fridays during Lent, it was just seafood. It was like shrimp stew, or it was seafood gumbo,
or something with fish,
or something like that. And so I remember thinking about that, and like that was kind of my first introduction to what maybe a fast could be or is thought of, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Do they do that? Because do they do that even in school? In that?
Oh yeah. That's what I was about to say. Growing up, like everybody experience that at school.
You had to do it.
We did it in our home. And so
I want to say they even do it like at First Baptist Christian Academy. I think it's a thing even
might
there.
be, I don't know.
During that season, it's fish on Fridays.
And no one's balking at fish.
No,
bring it on.
We live in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Fish is part of our diet.
Eating boiled crawfish tonight? Cool. Let's do it.
Speaking of, as we're filming this, it is moving into crawfish season and it needs to hurry up and get here.
It's a special time of year.
That's right. Yes.
It really is. By the time you may be watching this, it might
should
be full swing.
Maybe, it may already be. Who knows? But
Yeah.
anyway, we're moving in there.
see.
King cake, crawfish. Let's get it going.
That is so true. So, I mean, all right. So obviously, like the culture has a lot of, it's not necessarily misunderstandings, but it is some understandings of what a fast could be or should be or is in that sort of way. But I want us to kind of dive into fasting really is an ancient practice that culturally we sort of have lost a little bit of that. And so, Brian, why don't you start us with some kind of biblical foundations of fasting and where do we first start seeing it kind of come up in the Bible?
Well, the Psalms talks about it, Psalm 35. And then, of course, one of the first places that I remember, the first time I remember reading about it in the Bible, I don't think this is the first fast in the Bible. I can't remember where that is. But anyway, the first time that I remember reading about it is, of course, when David's child dies.
Yeah.
And he fasts and mourns for 7 days. I think it's 7 days. Is that right?
I think so.
So, yeah, something
2
along
Samuel
those
12.
Yeah. So, and then the child unfortunately passes away and he goes back about his business, fast ends. He gets back up on the throne, which is a really amazing story. But that's the first time I remember thinking like, and asking, what is this? Like, why would someone fast like this? It feels like it's trying to manipulate God to, hey, I'm going to fast to get you to make you do something for me.
Right.
And of course, that's not the goal or even the motivation at all. But there is, I like what Dallas Willard says. It says, fasting, we abstain in some significant way from food and possibly drink in order to draw near to the Lord. And that's the simplest definition that I think it's just the clearest. Fasting, denial of food, which is a part of self-denial, which is a big part of following Christ, is denial of self. Take up your cross, deny yourself. And fasting is a huge part of learning that discipline.
Yeah. And I think, this is the Live Like Jesus podcast. And so it would be important for us to kind of talk about what did Jesus say about fasting? How did he model it for us? So, Bo, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, none of us as New Testament believers would ever question, should we pray?
Right.
And so in Jesus's main teaching point about prayer, how to pray, when to pray, where to pray, all of that in Matthew chapter 5 and 6 and 7, right there in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, he begins with says, and when you pray, and then you fast forward just a few verses after he's finished talking about the subject of prayer, he says, and when you fast. So it implies to me that it was an expectation of Jesus' followers of that day that both prayer and fasting would be a part of it. Jesus began his ministry by going out into the desert and not eating. And that's a big deal because, one of the things that the enemy did was met Jesus out there and he says, if you are who you say you are, paraphrase, of course, why don't you turn these rocks into bread? So he was attacking Jesus's physical hunger. And so fasting was a part of Jesus's lifestyle. It was also a part of the Jewish lifestyle as well, through both seasons and in rhythms of life. And so because Jesus was known commonly as a rabbi in that day, he would have had that as a regular part of his rhythm. And anybody who followed him was expected to replicate what he was doing.
Right. Which is exactly what we're talking about.
That's right.
Here on this podcast is not just to, learn about what Jesus is doing, but to actually model it, like do what he did so that we can live like he lived. And that's the whole point of what we're saying. And you brought up David, you brought up Jesus, and you also brought up like some Jewish tradition. And we see throughout the Bible that when these big circumstances or big decisions were happening, that's usually when the people went to fast. And so I want to ask you, Brian, like, why do you think that we see this in these significant moments? And how can fasting kind of help me in those significant moments in my life? Because like stuff happens in my life too, and I have these big decisions to make. I have some things I have to deal with. why do you think they did it at those times, and how do you think it can help me if I would make it a practice?
So why they did it is it's an acknowledgement, I think, of only the Lord can help us at this point. Only the Lord can help us. And so again, if the definition I quoted and said a second ago is true, which I think it is, a way of abstaining from food and drink in order to draw closer to the Lord. And so the way it was explained to me as a young believer when I first read about fasting, as asked someone to explain it to me, is he said very simply, every time your stomach groans, ask the Lord to make your spirit groan.
Yeah,
for Him.
That's awesome.
That's just very simple.
Good. Yeah.
And I've remembered that forever. And so, going back to your question, I think there's something to that of like when we find ourselves in seasons where it's if the Lord does not do this, then I'm done. I'm sunk.
Yes.
It's over.
Yes.
Everything's over. Everything for me that I thought was important is gone. This, that, and the other. So it's a way to abstain from self-reliance and really get in tune with the Lord of God. I just want to draw near to you.
Living like Jesus can seem impossible at times. So we've created a free guide for you. Just go to the link in the description and you'll get a free guide to help you take your next steps in living like Jesus. Also, while you're down there, don't forget to like and subscribe.
And I think part of that, at least in my own experience, when Shay and I have gone through seasons where we fasted, like for our student ministry when we first started, and then also for our daughter Evangeline, sometimes it's been not the Lord releasing us to say, okay, I'm going to fix it all, but it's just been a reassurance of, hey, listen, the Lord's reassuring us, I'm with you.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of the fast, is to know I am with you.
Yeah. You mentioned like trying to manipulate God. It's not for Him.
No, I mean, listen,
not at all.
We don't have
what do we have to offer?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, but no, and that's the other picture is like, God's not like this. He's not like, hey, you better do it right. And then maybe I'll open my hands up. It's like, no, I think, a posture we need to see in our mind's eye with the Lord is He's open-handed towards us. And fasting is a way to get into the middle of that open-handedness that He's already got for us.
To get us ready for
I think those examples, the biblical examples, and even from you and Shay's life, that is, it's more documented in the Bible than any other. So like we've got this enemy approaching us. So what are we going to do? And so the king calls a national fast of people to go before the Lord and say, Lord, if you don't intervene, we're toast, And so it's that you're in a desperate situation and you're asking God to move on your behalf. And so a showing of dependence, I think, in letting go of food and nourishment shifts your heart too.
Yeah.
And it's really it's amazing how your stomach and your heart are connected as you begin to go through a fasting season or even begin just to think about it.
And the other side of that, that you talked about it being ancient, you go way back to like the desert monks and those guys that would live on months, just bread and water. They would tell you they never, they were nourished by something much different. I mean, when I think in some regards, when Jesus says, I am the bread of life, in some regards, like they took that not as a symbol, but like literally, like I am feeding upon Christ. And because my soul and spirit is full of Christ, I've got all the nourishment that I truly need.
Yeah. In line with that, I've heard a definition of fasting that says it's denying yourself physical nourishment so you can experience spiritual nourishment.
Yeah, that's good too.
And I think in our, let's just face it, our American context, we don't often connect those two things.
Yeah.
But they really are. And I think when you start trying to like make because like I'm in the middle of trying to make some habit changes in my life when it comes to my relationship with food and that sort of thing. What I've realized is that as much as it's a physical battle, it's a mental battle. Mm-hmm. It's like it goes much deeper than like me being hungry. I'm really not that hungry. It's more of like I am depending on food for certain things. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm hearing you guys say is that fasting oftentimes, and maybe that's why it works so well, even what we were talking about with the culture, like with the intermittent fast, maybe the reason it works so well is because it connects those two things that you're talking about, the physical and the spiritual, in a way that our culture doesn't really do that because we never go without food.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And so I think
we don't eat to live, we live to eat.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Especially here,
Sure.
South
I mean,
Louisiana.
listen, we start the whole podcast.
Got
King
some
cake
good-
crawfish. Let's go.
Got some good
So-
cooks. Yeah, and I think that's the point. But so far, we've really talked more about significant moments and approaching those moments, and obviously that's the right way to do it. We see biblical evidence for that. We see even personal evidence for that. But I want to come to you and ask you, as I hear y'all talking about this, I hear us saying the point of this is to align our hearts with God's heart, with the heart of Christ, right? And kind of do that. And so that's something that I want all the time, not just in those significant moments. And so how do you see this not only becoming something I do in those significant moments of when I want to seek the Lord, but how do I make this a part of my rhythm that's more ongoing with the rest of the 9 habits?
A lot of it's going to be determined by your schedule.
Yeah.
Just real practically. If you're going to get in the habit of Sabbath, that is a schedule issue. And so you have to make a physical adjustment in order to get into that. I think in terms of you have to schedule these fast days. So a real simple connection would be I'm going to fast leading into my Sabbath, and I'm going to break the fast during the Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
Is that kind of what you're looking
That's
at?
what I'm looking- yeah, that's
how
what
do
I'm
you
wondering.
get started in it? How does it connect? And so a Sabbath should be a regular rhythm in our life. And so in order to introduce fasting, we have to make a spot for it in our day. And so quite honestly, it's going to be hard for us to fast around the holidays. We're just coming out of the holiday season. Could you imagine trying to have a fast?
It'd be pretty hard.
And I know growing up in the camp culture and the hunting culture, I couldn't imagine trying to fast during hunting season with the guys that I grew up with because it was just like giant pots of food all over.
Yeah.
But I've learned that if I don't schedule it, then it will not happen. And so that's a real practical step to get started. And I like to combine it with Sabbath.
So you're combining it with Sabbath. What are some other habits that we can bring into fasting that you think would help? Because obviously you're removing something. We could probably replace it with some of the other habits.
I mean, of course, prayer.
Yeah.
That's probably I would say that's the most important one to couple with fasting. And silence and solitude is another good one to couple with fasting. So, because these are all, silence and solitude and fasting, these are all, maybe for lack of a better term, just they're habits of removal. Like we're removing something from our life. But prayer is a habit of addition. Like we're putting this into our life.
Gotcha.
This conversation relationship with the Lord. And so anytime I can couple like a removal with an addition type of thing. So where I would normally eat lunch, well, if I'm fasting, now I have, an hour to spend with the Lord in reading the Bible. That's another one. So biblical saturation, prayer, and even worship, easily those 3, couple that. So fill that time you would be eating with those things.
Yeah. So when I think about it, it's convenient for us to eat here.
Yeah.
I mean, here in where we live, it's super convenient to eat. You can go to a fast food place, get a meal, maybe not the best of meal, and be done with it in a half hour, both commute time and everything. In Jesus's day, these people were both harvesting and gleaning and prepping. And so if you think about the time that was consumed just by preparing meals throughout the day, these people had more time than we have or had. And so let's just say it was 3 hours to prep a meal. It's almost like the way we would prepare a holiday meal, that timeline on the daily. They had that much time there. And that seems like, wow, that's really impressive. But the other side of it, I think, because it's so convenient for us, we probably have to think more. It's just going to be more difficult for us to see all this extra time that we will have. And so even that, like the mealtime is a great time to invest in your relationship with God as you do that. But maybe as we do it more and more, maybe it would look a little bit like New Testament guys, where it's like a 2 or 3 hour time of just spending, or 2 or 3 hours of just sitting and listening or reading and just hearing from the Lord about your life or about His desires for you. And so, it's hard probably to get started, and it's hard probably to find it. But I just think if we think about it just for a moment, like I could do this week. I don't need to make a long-term plan.
And like with a lot of the habits, what I think it is difficult sometimes to get started, but sometimes we just need to do it and fail at it and then try it again. And be okay. It might not be perfect.
Every other habit in life is that way. I mean, when you first started running, lifting weights, dieting, whatever it is, if you want to learn something new, you're going to fail.
Yeah. And so next episode, we're going to really dive deep into the specifics of how do we actually make this a part of our lives, and what are some specific things that we can do. But I think we should end our episode today at least talking about what a fast could look like and how someone could get started, and maybe even diving into some common mistakes that we see people making, or you guys see people making when they first try to start a fast. And so we've talked a lot about food, and we may have mentioned some other things, but let's dive a little bit deeper in that. Is it only food, or is there other things that I can fast from?
I mean, there's other things. In the Bible, you only see food, though.
Right.
So, of course, there's other things, like you could fast from social media, from music, from TV, whatever you see as something that is pulling your heart in a certain direction, because that's
a good point. Yeah.
That's what you want to do. Is this is a retuning, so to speak, of my heart towards the Lord's rhythm here. But here's what I would say is, if you do those, make clear, like, I am doing a fast from this. Don't say I'm fasting. Because it's like, well, no, I mean, because honestly, like biblically, when you get down to it, it's like food is what the Bible talks about.
It's the thing, right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure you've seen people do social media fast. Do you think that it can be effective for people to do that, and why? Like, how have you seen it be effective?
I think it could be totally effective. While I agree with Brian that the Bible is exclusive food and water in that.
But they didn't have social media.
They didn't have social media.
Jesus. Social media.
Yeah. What would Jesus do about that? He would not have it. And so just take a look at your phone, open it up, go to settings, find screen time, and just take a glance at how much screen time you spend on, whatever are your top items. Probably there's a lot of extra time that's being wasted. And social media, maybe one of them, YouTube or everything. If you could just set that time aside and focus on the Lord. It's a rhythm of something that we do twice a year with men in our church, where we ask them to completely abstain from social media and another type of item, including food, on a weekly basis for 6 to 8 weeks. And I hear stories come out of that of, I didn't think I could do it, but I did it.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's very beneficial. I hear some of those same men say, I just don't think I have enough time to read my Bible at the rate that I want to read my Bible. And then they put down social media and they have a lot of extra time.
Voila.
Yeah. Bingo.
It's like it's magic. I think if I'm thinking about a mistake that I maybe have made when it comes to fasting over the years, you mentioned this earlier, but I want us to spend a couple of minutes on it here and kind of get you to expand on it.
Okay.
The idea, because it is for significant moments. And so I'm fasting, but the mistake would be to think that I'm somehow like forcing God's hand by fasting. You call it manipulating.
Yeah, that's what I would call it.
I want us to stay there for a minute and just talk about, like, it's not that, it's something else. Tell us what it is. And we've talked about aligning with God's will and his heart and all that. Kind of just expand on that a little bit.
Ultimately, I think it's John 15. This is part of abiding, and it's learning to abide. If you go back to the episode where we talk about the spiritual journey, those who fast most effectively are usually those who are in stage 4, because we're all discombobulated or going through the wall because we just don't know which way is up and down. And in particular, those who fast just because they want to know the Lord are those who are in that stage 5 and 6. I mean, the whole motivation is I'm hungry for him, and I want more of him. That's the entire motivation. I don't want his stuff. I mean, it goes back to the classic prodigal story. It's like, I don't want God's stuff. I want him. If he never gives me anything, as long as he gives me him, as long as I have him, I have everything that I need. And so for me, ultimately, that's the goal of fasting is I'm hungry for the Lord. I'm thirsty for the Lord, and I want to live hungry for the Lord and live thirsty for the Lord. And so our bodies are so controlling over our lives. Yeah. And so even C.S. Lewis talked about how he thought it was important that you kneel when you pray because of how important your body is to your spiritual life. And to try to ignore that would be really to kind of just ignore reality.
Right.
And so I think in some regards, we do have to take into the fact of like, at times I've got to deny my body because that is part of growing my spirit, because these things are all the way God has made us. They're all interconnected. And so for my spirit to be more awake and alive to the Lord, then sometimes my stomach's going to have to be empty.
Yeah, man, that is something that I'm really, really diving into right now personally.
Yeah.
And I can see it, I can feel it, and I can see some evidence of that.
I would say this, Bo, and I would ask you to speak to this too. I haven't found anybody, I haven't met the person yet who fasted effectively, who got done with that fast and said, the Lord is farther away from me than when I started.
Right.
I haven't met that. Have you met that person?
No, I have not. But in doing it, I've always experienced kind of like a dip
Yeah.
in it. And it was almost like the Lord just kind of wrenching in that moment to bring. And when you come out of that, and it maybe just be a moment, it's like you're through to the other side of, it's not like a giant epiphany. It's just like, there's another level of freedom.
Yeah.
There's another level of intimacy. There's just like, I don't know. I can't even put it in words. So I'm fumbling a little bit, but
I think this is one of those disciplines where, listen, I'll be honest, before I did it, I didn't believe anybody who talked about it. Because it's always just
Maybe
like,
that's where I
that
am.
just sounds horrible. Like just horrible.
Yeah.
And then I did it, and Shay and I did it together, and we saw some, just really sensed a closeness to the Lord, and then saw some amazing things come out of that. So in all honesty, some who are maybe watching or listening, they might be thinking the same thing, like, yeah, right.
Yeah.
You've got to be kidding me. And that's okay, if
sure.
that's where you are right now. But I promise you, if you give it, if you say, Lord, I don't quite understand this. I don't even know why I'm going to try it. But you say to do it in your word, and I'm going to trust that. Yeah. So let's give it a whirl.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And with Bo, when you were talking, it made me think like, I'm not much of a runner, but I hear people saying there's like this thing as a runner's high.
Oh yeah, you're missing out, bro. I can tell you from personal experience, you're missing out.
That's a real thing, right? And so it almost seems like you were just, it almost seems like you were describing like a faster's high. Like you might hit a little dip, but then you come out where you feel this jolt of connection and energy.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a strange, and I'm missing on words again. It's just, you got to experience it.
I completely see
to
that.
believe it. Yeah.
Well, we do hope that you really have a clearer understanding of what fasting is, and maybe even like a sense of need to make it a part of your rhythm and your 9 habits as we've been going through. We want you to know that fasting isn't about getting something or manipulating God. It's more than just a simple religious tradition. It's really how we connect deeply to our Lord and Savior. And so that's what we want you to see here. We hope that you've enjoyed this podcast. If you did, please share it with your friends. And if you think they'll get something out of it, make sure that they watch it, like it, subscribe to our channel. We'd love to see you back here next time, because next time we're going to actually dive into some of the more ways to apply this and some specific things that you can do to make this a part of your rhythm. And so we're so glad that you joined us. We'll see you next time.
So living like Jesus isn't something that comes naturally to us. And so we all need help in doing that. So we've created a free guide to help you out. Just click on the link in the description for you to take your next steps to live like Jesus.